Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Synced Up Design's Movement Basics. My name is Kyle, and today we're going to be moving away from our stationary techniques and start looking into the ideas behind traveling techniques and skill sets. In today's video specifically, we'll be going over jazz walks and jazz runs. As always, before we get started, please make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit that bell icon so you can always stay up to date with any of our future uploads. And with that out of the way, let's start traveling across the floor. So jazz walks and jazz runs are different skill sets that help us travel across the floor, both in technique and choreography. They have different rates of speed and distance that they cover. The technique itself is slightly different between the two, but the overall idea is relatively the same. If you haven't yet, please make sure to go watch our previous videos on tendus, pliés, coupe positions, and anything that precedes those videos, so that way you're familiar with the components that we'll be referencing in today's video. So the first thing we're going to cover in this video is our jazz walks. And before we get into how to do a jazz walk, I want to first cover the starting position. The starting position is going to be something called a B+. Take whichever foot that you want to initially step with first and bring it behind the base foot into a demi-point position with a slight bend of the knee. Most of my weight is on that front foot currently, and I have that back foot beveled in a demi-point position. Be careful that when I'm in this position that I'm not letting that foot sickle, but I'm pushing that inner ankle forward and still thinking about my foot shaping as it's through here. This is just sort of like a prep position that gets us ready to go into any sort of traveling technique. So we start in that B+ position, and the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to take that back foot and you're going to bring it and drag it through coupe. You're always going to pass through coupe as you drag the foot through, so remember this. We pass through coupe. Once we get to here, we extend out in front of us into a tendu. So we start in that B+, pulled the coupe, and then extended out into the tendu. From here, you're going to start to transfer your weight from that base foot to the front foot that's about to take a step. So it's in the tendu right now. I start transferring my weight over, and as I do that, I pull my weight off of that back foot and extend it into a tendu behind me. So as I extend here, I just transfer the weight and pass through tendu in the back. Once I've reached this position, I just repeat the process. I take that back foot, drag it through to pass through coupe, extend it out to tendu, and then I transfer the weight again. Every time you transfer weight, that's when you take a step. So you start in that B+ position, you pass through all the positions we just talked about, and every step is you transferring the weight as you drag through those tendus and coupe positions. So one more quick review, you start in that B+, drag through coupe every time, extend out to tendu, transfer the weight, create a back tendu, and then repeat the process. So now that you kind of have the idea of the jazz walk, I want to talk about some things you want to avoid as you're working through your jazz walk. The first thing is if you remember while we worked through tendus, we talked about making sure that that tendu extends out to the center of our body. Same thing applies for our jazz walks because we're passing through a tendu as we go through. So we want to be careful that as we're taking our steps in our jazz walks, that we're not opening our foot and swaying side to side off of that center point as we go through. We want to, again, pass through the center of our body through that tendu and keep these walks as straightforward as possible by crossing into the center of our body every time we take that step. Really trying to emphasize the turnout as we do that as well, and making sure that we keep in one straight line as we travel. As you're going through your jazz walks, it's important to make sure that you're passing through each of those positions, the coupe and the tendu and all that good stuff. But you also want to make sure that you make it a smooth pass through. You want to be careful not to make this super choppy because you're thinking about the positions and you kind of look robotic as you go through. So when you get more comfortable with the order of the sequence, try and make it one smooth motion that's a little bit more controlled and flowy as you go through. Again, you still want to make sure that you're still technical with the approach, but you want to be cautious that you're not so overly thoughtful on the technique that it causes you to become stiff in your body. Another thing to be careful of is as you're doing jazz walk specifically, your foot stays connected to the ground the entire time. Even when it's in coupe, my big toe is dragging across the floor, so I'm not lifting the foot up and then placing it again. That's a tendency some people have when they do jazz walks, is they take a big step lifting that foot up as they go through and letting it pass through this weird non-existent cafe position or even sometimes a passe. So be careful that you don't do that. You want to feel at least your big toe dragging across the floor as it extends past the coupe and into the tendu and then transfers weight, yeah? When you're doing jazz walk specifically, always stay connected to the floor. And then the last thing you want to think about is when your legs should be bent and when it should be straight. The legs should be straight whenever you're in a tendu or passing the weight over into the other tendu. It bends when you pull that back leg into a coupe, but every other position it stays straight. So the tendency some people have is they take a plie every time they take a step as they do a jazz walk, and that's incorrect technically. So you want to make sure that the only time your leg bends is when you pull it through the coupe, because your knee has to bend to allow your foot room to come into that position. But as soon as it extends out to tendu, it stays straight all the way through the weight transfer until we pull that other leg into that coupe position to then travel into our next step. So now that we understand our jazz walks a little bit more, I want to go into the detail of our jazz runs. When it comes to the technique behind it, it's fairly similar besides two major components. The first one being that you don't emphasize the pass through the coupe as much when you go through your jazz run. The second thing being that you're going to be in a plie the entire time, and I'll go into more detail about why that is in a second. But we're going to start in that same B+ position, and we're gonna plie as we go to take our first step. Notice that when I took that step, I didn't emphasize the big pass through the coupe and the dragging of the foot. When you do a jazz run, you are actively gonna lift that foot because you're trying to increase the distance that you're traveling as you go through. So you need to think about taking a bigger step. I'm still leading with the toe and then transferring the weight toe, ball, heel as I take that step, but I am not thinking about dragging and passing through that coupe. But notice that when I took that step, I took it in a plie position, yeah? And the reason that we want to think about lengthening through this in a plie is because if I kept my leg straight and tried to extend my leg as far as I could, I'd create this tendu position. But notice if I plie my leg, my foot is able to travel a little bit more and then I'm able to take a wider step. So we use that plie to increase the range that our legs are able to travel as we go through. So again, we're not passing through this coupe, we're not dragging across the floor, and we're using our plie as we go through. The next thing you want to think about is as you're taking a step on that foot, again, leading with the toe of your foot and passing through the plie, I'm also thinking about pushing off of that back foot to increase a little bit more range and give me some more power into my next step. So that's a moment where your leg does straighten, and then as it takes the next step, it'll bend after that, and then the other leg straightens to push off the floor. So quick series of jazz runs looks like this. And out, 2, 3, 4. Yeah? Thinking about making sure that you're in lengthening through that back leg, plieing the base leg, and still leading with the toe, ball, heel. Again, don't focus on the coupe. Try not to drag the toe. That's where it's different from a jazz walk. We want to really think about traveling a little bit farther in less time. When it comes to a jazz run, there's something you want to be cautious of as you go through. The tendency for some people is to take their upper body and lean it back ever so slightly and try to extend their legs and have the legs kind of pull their body behind them. You want to think about it the other way. You want to think of almost leaning slightly forward, not so far forward. We still want to keep alignment, but just pushing our energy just a little bit more in front of us. So that way, as we take the step, we're actually leading with the energy going forward to then travel a little bit more. If I pull that energy back, my leg has to extend and I kind of look like a Russian dancer doing some sort of like kick line or anything like that. We don't want to create that look, you know? So we want to think about leaning a little bit more forward and pushing off of the back leg to engage more energy in the forward position as we travel in our jazz run. So just to review what we went over today, we talked about our jazz walks and our jazz runs. Jazz walks being a step that's a little bit smaller, passing through a coupe position, extending out to tendu, and then doing a weight transfer before repeating the process. And then our jazz runs differ just a little bit by not passing through the coupe and disconnecting from the floor ever so slightly to increase more power by pushing off the back leg and using our plie to extend our legs a little bit longer. Remember, we talked about maintaining turnout, leading with our toe the entire time and trying to stay in a central straight line and not allowing ourselves to sway off that line as we try and travel forward with these skill sets. And that was our quick introduction video on jazz walks and jazz runs. I hope we have a slightly better understanding behind the idea. Remember, just focus on leading with your toe and trying to maintain proper technique as you go through each of the specific skill sets. And then the more you practice it, the better you'll get at it. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed our time here introducing the new ideas behind traveling in our Movement Basics series. If you did, please feel free to like the video and go ahead and comment down below any questions you may have about these skill sets. Anyways, I'll see you guys in the next one, and happy dancing.